This is the home office version of cracking a nut with a sledgehammer. What's up guys, my name is Ed. 50% Awesome is about understanding that nobody's perfect, but that doesn't mean that you can't strive for awesome. So I just spent months over engineering a space for my wife's work from home setup, and I'm gonna show you how I did it. So I live in Vancouver where it's beautiful but ridiculously expensive. We didn't have a spare room for an office, but our landing here has like $6,000 worth of square footage being wasted that I thought I could put to better, though not necessarily code compliant use. Initially, I was just going to use folding shelf brackets for a quick pop-up desk solution. That clearly spiraled out of control until I had the urge to make a stand-up, but hidden, convertible workstation that is out of the way when not in use, has programmable memory positions, and can host some sick staircase dance parties. Sure to check your local building codes for staircase dance party regulations.
We loved this two-tone look of the Ikea Besta setup. We actually had that same scheme in our living room, so we decided on using these. Well, the thinner versions of them anyway. I recently got into 3D printing and became familiar with a site called Tinkercad. So it's a free site where you can do some basic 3D modeling, and it's easy enough for a beginner like me to understand. Basically, you make shapes, which you can cut out of other shapes or combine to make new shapes. Many rectangles later, I came up with a couple of different designs, but decided to go with this one. I did a quick mock-up with painter's tape of the design in the actual space, including how far the cabinet would stick out with the doors closed as well as with the desktop down to make sure everything fit and that this was actually feasible. My idea was to have the Besta unit sit on top of what was basically kind of like a cabinet frame, with a drawer type inner portion that would move up and down via a linear actuator hidden inside the structure. So I have to at least try to keep my tool buying to a minimum. This means no table saw. Instead, I made this cutting guide for my circular saw, and I think painting it makes it go a little bit faster. This allowed me to make straight, accurate cuts I could only dream of previously. With that new jig in hand, there was plenty of measuring, marking, cutting, vacuuming, marking, measuring, cutting, vacuuming, measuring, until I was left with this. A pile of cut lumber I never thought would be possible for me to pull off. I cut the pieces further down to size with my miter saw and super not ghetto stop blocks until everything was cut and sized according to my cut list. To put everything together, I used this Craig K5 pocket hole jig. I love pocket holes because they're quick and easy for a noob like me while providing decent strength. All that said, they're still not completely foolproof, especially for a fool like me.
It was at this moment that he knew. He f***ed up.
Anyways, I applied glue to the joints and screwed in the pocket screws with the help of this pocket hole clamp. Pocket holes can get a little squirrely sometimes just going by hand, so it's definitely recommended to clamp down your pieces. Remember that pocket hole I drilled where my stop collar slipped? Well, this is what happens as a result of that. Not something an angle grinder can't fix though. The frame also won't be weight bearing, which is why those partially compromised pocket hole joints don't really matter. I made a second identical rectangle and the frame would basically look like this when completed. I just want to stress again the importance of marking and labeling your cuts because with so many similar pieces, it's super easy to get mixed up. For this base, that will be weight bearing, I made another box, but this time with 2x4s and 45-degree miters because we can all try to be fancy at least sometimes.
Hiya.
Since this will be bearing the weight of the entire structure, I added some plywood pieces inside the core for extra support, basically making a torsion box. With all the cuts made, it was time to go inside and start damaging my start the install. Since every inch counts.
That's what she said. Don't you dare.
I cut out the baseboard with my multi-tool so I can install flush against the wall. Cutting the caulking off with a utility knife and putty knife, I was able to easily pry the backboard off the wall. Something felt off though. Sure enough, we had a decent slope on the back wall that we'll have to deal with later. With the baseboard off, the drywall screws were exposed and they help identify where the studs would be located. I still wanted to verify with the stud finder though, but was having a little bit of trouble. Maybe my stud finder was broken? I noticed the drywall screws were only 10 inches apart where you'd normally expect 16. Thankfully, I had access to some video inside the house before drywall was put up, and I saw this. Apparently, there's a thick stack of planks butted up against each other behind the wall. So after marking off that area and verifying with a working stud finder, it was time to start assembling the frame. To compensate for the slope in the floor, I added shims to make things level and used wood glue and brad nails to hold things together. Then rinse and repeat until you have a box. The center section is reinforced as this is where the linear actuator will be placed and where the brunt of the weight will be carried. If you're not familiar, the linear actuator is a device that creates motion in a straight or linear line. So this is the device that will be moving the workstation up and down, hopefully like this. I went with this actuator, which is rated for around 330 pounds and moves at 20 millimeters per second with no load on it. The total weight of the cabinets when fully set up is way under that 330 pounds, so we should be good to go. I secured the plywood support core with screws, then got the box ready for the plywood top, which was still able to withstand a good jig.
Just like that like button. So don't be shy and give it a good smashing if you're enjoying the video. The subscribe and bell buttons are just as durable, so be sure to click away to be notified when parts 2 and 3 get posted.
Some wood glue and brad nails later, we have a base. Next up was the outer cabinet box frame. I first secured the bottom to the studs and then to the base. It's not pretty, but again, none of this will be visible anyway. With the help of some clamps and making sure everything stayed level along the way, I worked my way up, assembling the rest of the box with pocket screws. I have no idea when this happened. I also made sure to secure the frame to the studs. The actuator is secured by a mount that I'm screwing into the base. I actually mounted it too far to the front because I thought it would be a good idea to secure it right up against the plywood, but didn't take into account the inner frame that would need clearance to slide up and down. The inner frame was assembled in mostly the same way as the outer frame, with a mixture of wood glue, brad nails, and pocket screws. I also used a couple of corner clamps I 3D printed, which definitely helped me to keep everything square. I had a tighter tolerance on this inner piece because this is the part that the actuator would actually be moving, so I needed to keep it as square as possible to prevent any issues during movement. I used drawer rails to make sure that the inner frame could glide up and down smoothly while being moved by the actuator. This is my first time putting drawer slides on anything, and man, well, it's tough getting everything so precise. More on that in a bit. This is also the point where I finally noticed I had an armpit rip in my shirt.
Did you know that the Chinese use the same word for crisis as they do for opportunity?
Yes, crisis-tunity!
Guess who has a new glue rag? I finished off the top of the inner frame similar to the torsion box base. The top piece of plywood is going to connect this frame to the Besta cabinets. For this inner part, I used some cut pieces of plywood laid flat and sandwiched them with wood glue and pocket screws to complete the box. I also added a piece of 1/2-inch MDF to where the actuator was connected to make sure everything was at the right height. Remember what I said about being precise with the drawer rails? Yeah, the totally expected happened. I was off about 1/8 of an inch on the right side. Not a huge deal, just had to make more shims. At this point, I wanted to do a quick test. And then a harder test. And everything was looking pretty good. Putting the Besta cabinets together is pretty simple. It's basically a box. Plus I had some little helpers. Power tools might seem like overkill for IKEA, but it definitely saves the risks. You just have to make sure you don't go full throttle. With the first box done and ready to inhabit, I still had 2 more to go, but I think my helpers had had enough. Hi.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
I am
I am who?
Chloe.
Wanna watch? Come here.
Oh no.
Thank you, Disney Plus. I clamped and screwed down the Besta cabinets together so that they could move as one unit. The bottom of the units actually have M8 size threaded inserts, which were intended for the feet, but they're actually perfect for me to secure the cabinets to the inner frame. So I measured and drilled matching holes on the plywood board that would act as the top of the inner frame. I then drilled in with a Forstner bit so that the M8 screw heads that I'm using could sit nice and flush. If you're wondering why the screws are mismatched, it's because I'm a hoarder and have a collection of these from random packages like TV mounts. I added a reinforcing backing to the Besta. I made this out of the same 3/4 inch plywood I used for the frames and fixed them together with pocket screws. Since the monitors would act as a pulling force towards the front of the cabinet, I added an additional plank mounted on the outside of the cabinet frame. If this can support my weight, it can support the monitor no problem. Not gonna jump this time though. The backing would also help make the cabinet more solid and give me something to mount the Besta onto the linear rails I'll be using to guide the cabinet when it's moving up and down. This way we'll have guides for the actuator movement from both the drawer slides in the frame below, as well as with the linear rails on the wall. I got these heavy duty aluminum rails on Amazon. There are 4 of these blocks that hook into the railing and provide smooth movement with the ball bearings. I decided to cut the drywall to mount the railing directly to the studs. Every ½ inch counts.
Don't you dare.
I made my cuts with my multi-tool, making plenty of devil's dust. Thanks to the video I had of the house before drywall was put up, I knew that this section of wood was actually a joist and or beam directly above and below that would provide plenty of support to screw the railings into. After marking the mounting points, I added some plywood to fill in the gaps where needed for extra stability, then resealed the vapor barrier with tape. It's super important to make sure that these railings are mounted straight, so I took extra precautions to make sure that everything was level as I went. After all was said and done, the railings felt super secure.
I think that's a good place to end things off for this video. I'll have links to most of the stuff I used in the description down below. Some of those will be affiliate links, so clicking through and making a purchase will help me keep my Amazon Associates account from being deactivated due to an activity. Again. But for real, it's an awesome way to say thanks and to support me in this channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, and all the things, and be sure to check out parts 2 and 3. There's still a ton of stuff to do. Bye.